ischemia or infarction, secondary to a reduction in perfusion to tissue due to the vasculitic lesion. So when the increased blood supply leading to cell death and organ death eventually. So the severity of the symptoms ranges from self-limiting rash to life-threatening disease. So how do you want to define the vasculitis? So vasculitis is defined as inflammatory infiltration of vessel walls with damage to mural structures. And the vasculitis is a pathological finding, not a diagnosis. Efforts must be made to determine the cause. So here you can see the anatomy of the vessels. On the both sides, you can see here this is for the veins, venular structures, and this is for the arterials. So we'll go one by one. Here you can see the elastic artery, and it has from inside to the outside. If you go, there is an endothelium. There is an which is tunica interna, which contains of endothelium and internal elastic layer. And next it's tunica media and tunica externa. Whereas in large vein you see only the endothelium, interna, externa, the media and the externa. There is no internal elastic layer. Whereas in the muscular artery, it's same, but there is no presence of the internal elastic artery. The medium-sized vein is also same as the large vein. But whereas the arteriole, you see smooth muscle cells, the tunica media, endothelium, and the basement membrane. Whereas in the venules, you see tunica externum and endothelium. And in the continuous capillary vessels, you see endothelial cells and basement membrane. And the fenestrated capillary, the pores, the venular pores, you see endothelial and basement membrane. So here you can see there is the presence of internal elastic layer in the elastic arteries, the large arteries. Whereas the muscular arteries, there is no presence of the elastic layer. Whereas in the veins, there is no the veins, maybe the large vein, the medium-sized vein, or venules. So here you can see again on the left side there is an artery. You can see endothelium, the innermost layer, followed by subendothelial layer. This is the internal elastic lamina and the external elastic lamina, which is present on the either side of the tunica media. So this is very important because the arteries can stretch when there is more increased pressure out there. The arteries can stretch, whereas the veins cannot. Here you can see there is no presence of elastic layers here. There is presence of endothelium, subendothelial layer. You get tunica media and tunica externa in the veins. Whereas in the arteries, you can see here there is presence of internal elastic lamina and external elastic lamina. This is an important point. So depending upon which artery or which arterioles or veins involved, the vasculitis is differentiated. Here you can see the aorta or the large vessels, the involvement, then you can say it as giant cell arteritis or Takayama arteritis, whereas here the medium vessel vasculitis, they are bearing the aorta and all. You can see polyarteritis nodosa and Kawasaki disease. And whereas the involvement of the arterioles, venules, there you can see small vessel vasculitis. So primary vascular syndrome and secondary vascular syndrome. So predominantly large vessel vasculitis. So these are involving the aorta and the large vessels in the body. The giant cell vasculitis, also known as temporal arteritis, and the other one Takayasu arteritis. And the predominantly medium vessel vasculitis, that is polyarteritis nodosa and the Kawasaki disease. And the predominantly small vessel vasculitis, here you can see the ANCA positive and ANCA negative. In that ANCA positive, that is anti-neutrophilic citrullinate antibody, you can see C-ANCA and P-ANCA. So the C-ANCA and P-ANCA, the C-ANCA positive is Wegener's granulomatosis, and whereas the P-ANCA positive is microscopic polyangiitis and Creutzfeldt syndrome. So this is important. There is ANCA positive and negative, whereas the C-ANCA we see Wegener's granulomatosis, whereas the P-ANCA you see microscopic polyangiitis or Creutzfeldt syndrome. In the remaining, they are essential mixed cryoglobulinemia Hinonchinone purpura, idiopathic cutaneous vasculitis, and Behcet syndrome. These are ANCA negative. So here you can see the secondary vascular syndrome, vasculitis syndrome, they are drug induced. So secondary to drug induced, there could be hydrazine, propylthiouracil, allopurinol, or thiazide drug induced, or serum sickness, or infections, or malignancies, or some SLE, rheumatoid autoimmune disorders like SLE, rheumatoid arthritis, Sjogren's syndrome, or others such as primary biliary cirrhosis, ulcerative colitis, or retroperitoneal fibrosis. So the important thing you should remember is predominantly large vessel vasculitis. They are giant cell vasculitis and Takayasu arthritis. The medium vessel vasculitis, they are polyarthritis nodosa and Kawasaki disease, and predominantly small vessel vasculitis. So you can see large vessel and medium vessel have 2 each, whereas the remaining all fall into small vessel vasculitis. In that, C ANCA positive is Wegener's, and whereas the P ANCA positive is microscopic and Chuktra syndrome. So how the pathology and pathophysiology of the vasculitis is seen. So the number of factors involved in the ultimate expression of vasculitis syndrome is due to antigen stimulus is usually seen. Few hypothesized mechanisms are immune complex formation, ANCA formation, and pathogenic T lymphocyte response. So there is no fixed mechanism, but there are few hypothesized mechanisms like immune complex formation, ANCA formation, and pathogenic T lymphocyte response. So you can see the complement activation. This is better. There is immune complex deposition. This leads to activation of complement cascade. Like this will be activation of complement cascade, leading to tissue inflammation and edema. And this deposition also leads to recruitment of the immune cells, and this leads to pro-inflammatory expression due to production of neutrophils and natural killer cells, and this leads to tissue inflammation. And whereas the mast cell and basophil degranulation leads to vasodilatation and edema. So that is the most important here. Immune complex deposition leading to activation of complement system. So this slide also. The activation of complement system leading to production of neutrophils, and the priming leading to release of pro-inflammatory cytokines and the anti-neutrophilic cytotoxic antibodies. So this leads to tissue inflammation and edema. And whereas the recruitment of immune cells, that is pro-inflammatory and cytokine expression, will be done, leading to neutrophil and natural killer cell degranulation, leading to tissue inflammation. Whereas in the IgA vasculitis, immunoglobulin A vasculitis, the Hinonchinone purpura, which is a small vessel vasculitis, there you can see neutrophil activation leading to vasculitis, whereas mesangial cell activation leading to glomerular nephritis. This is secondary to immune complexes, leads to mesangial cell activation, leading to glomerular nephritis. So we have two, C ANCA and P ANCA. So C ANCA, this is cytoplasmic, and P ANCA, this is perinuclear anti-neutrophilic cytotoxic antibody. And here their antibodies are produced mainly, if you can see there are so many against so many, but the one you should remember is serum proteinase 3. The C ANCA is against the serum proteinase 3, whereas the P ANCA is against the myeloperoxidase. So these 2 points you can remember here. Antibodies produced against the serum proteinase 3 is seen in the C ANCA pattern, whereas in the P ANCA pattern you will see the antibodies being produced against the myeloperoxidase. So, though there are so many possible, but these 2 are the very important points here. So on the differentiation, the P ANCA and the C ANCA, here you can see primary vasculitis, microscopic polyangiitis, polyarthritis nodosa, which is a medium vessel vasculitis, and the Feltis syndrome, SLE. So because we are discussing about vasculitis, the important things are primary vasculitis, microscopic polyangiitis, and Chuktra syndrome. And the other one is polyarthritis nodosa, which is a medium vessel vasculitis. And the C ANCA, you can see primary vasculitis, whereas the other one is Wegener's granulomatosis, microscopic polyangiitis, and Poisson syndrome can be seen, but this is not specific. But Wegener's granulomatosis is the specific, whereas the P-ANCA, these are the specific. In these conditions, you may see C-ANCA, but it's not specific. But whereas in the Wegener's granulomatosis, C-ANCA disease is specific. So the potential mechanisms could be the pathogenic immune complex formation or the production of anti-neutrophilic cytoplasmic antibodies and pathogenic T-cell lymphocyte response. So in which condition you will see pathogenic immune complex formation is IgA vasculitis, that is Inancinol purpura, lupus vasculitis, SLE, the serum sickness, and hepatitis C and hepatitis B virus. Whereas the production of anti-neutrophilic cytoplasmic antibodies is seen in granulomatosis with polyangiitis Wegener's, that is C-ANCA, and microscopic polyangiitis and Chukstras syndrome. So these three we discussed earlier. The immune complex formation, as we discussed, IgA vasculitis, Inancinol purpura, and the pathogenic T lymphocyte response and granuloma formation. So this is important here. Granulomatous diseases. So what are the granulomatous diseases of the vasculitis? Giant cell arteritis, that is temporal arteritis, Takayasu arteritis, Wegener's granulomatosis, and Chukstras syndrome. So the four conditions or the four vasculitis disorder where it is granuloma formation or granulomatosis diseases is giant cell arteritis, Takayasu arteritis, Wegener's granulomatosis, and Chukstras syndrome. So this is the important point here. Granuloma formation is seen in which conditions of the vasculitis is these four. So how do you want to approach a person whom you are suspecting a vasculitis disorder? So any patient with unexplained systemic illness or clinical abnormalities suggesting of vasculitis. So the clinical features highly suggestive of vasculitis are mononeuritis multiplexa, pulmonary and renal pattern, that is involvement of pulmonary and followed by the renal, and livedo reticularis and palpable purpura. So when the purpura is seen in so many conditions, but palpable purpura is mostly seen in the vasculitis disorders in the presence of livedo reticularis and the pulmonary and renal pattern and mononeuritis multiplexa. So these clinical features are present in a person, that is highly suggestive of vasculitis, or any patient presenting with unexplained systemic illness. So you go through all his history and all, but you are not able to compare definitive diagnosis, then it could be a vasculitis or non-vasculitis disease. So exclude other diseases such as infectious diseases or the other cause of vasculitis. After the exclusion, series of progressive steps and establish the primary or secondary. So if there is a medical emergency or end organ damage suspected, if there is involvement of pulmonary or renal involvement, then you can see aggressive therapy for vasculitis syndrome, that is glucocorticoids and immunosuppressive drugs can be given and the end organ damage can be prevented. And after the end or resolution of the end organ damage, you can move forward. Whereas the ones in the other conditions where you are not suspecting end organ damage, then you go for diagnostic test and offending antigen to be removed. Once it is confirmed which antigen is causing the vasculitis, you can remove that. Or if the vasculitis is due to other underlying conditions such as neoplasms or autoimmune diseases, treat the primary cause. And the specific investigations such as biopsies is also required. And if the vasculitis syndrome is primary, then categorize and treat it. So once specific vasculitis is established, according to the treatment, depending upon which vasculitis disorder it is, it should be given. We will discuss in the coming slides individually about each vasculitis disorder, and then monitoring and follow-up should be done. So what is most important thing? The history is the most important. That helps to differentiate between the primary and the secondary vasculitis. So the history should be asked about the medications, that is hypersensitivity vasculitis or hepatitis B or C, which leads to polyarteritis nodosa or cryoglobulinemia, or connective tissue diseases, any previously, or any sexual history leading to HIV infections or HPV or HCV, or any illicit drug use such as cocaine, amphetamine, and certain age groups and gender are associated with specific vasculitis. Some are seen in younger age groups and some are seen in older age groups, such as temporal arteritis, which is seen in 6th decade, the 4th to the 6th decade, and some are seen in the Kawasaki diseases and all, they are seen in the younger age groups. And Wegener's granulomatous and polyarteritis nodosa have mean age between 45 and 50. And Hinanchinon purpurant Takayasa arteritis, it is bimodal temporal arteritis, whereas the Hinanchinon purpurant Takayasa arteritis is seen in 17 and 26 within the given population. Here you can see the giant cell arteritis mostly affects the people in 6th decade. So depending upon the age groups, the middle age groups are Wegener's granulomatosis and polyarteritis nodosa, whereas the teenage groups or 2nd decade is mostly involving Hinanchinon purpurant Takayasu arteritis, whereas in the 6th decade, the old age groups, you can see the giant cell arteritis, also known as temporal arteritis. And the Takayasu arteritis and giant cell arteritis occurs predominantly in females. So how do you suspect? Presentation of patients with suspected of vasculitis, as we discussed before, mononeuritis multiplexa, palpable purpura, livido reticularis, and involvement of pulmonary and renal. And the clinical findings and workup or the biopsy, where you establish a diagnosis and you categorize a specific vasculitis syndrome and you treat it. Or you determine the pattern and the extent of disease, or look for the underlying disease and then treat the underlying disease, or look for the offending antigen. So either you establish the diagnosis straight away and treat the diagnosis, treat the vasculitis disorder, or you take away the offending antigen, or you treat the underlying disorder which is leading to vasculitis. So here you can see some of the signs and symptoms. Here you can see bleeding due to the large vessel vasculitis. This is jaw claudication. This is the temporal artery thickening, and this is the scalp necrosis. Mostly these are seen in temporal arteritis, that is giant cell arteritis. And involvement of occipital artery and facial artery leads to headache and stroke. And there is variable clubbing. Variable clubbing is, you will be seeing the clubbing in one hand or one finger and absent in other. So here you can see the left hand, they are having clubbing, whereas the right hand there is normal. So the variable clubbing and limb size, here you can see the left hand is a bit small compared to the right hand, and the variable clubbing. So these are seen in large vessel vasculitis. In the medium vessel vasculitis, you will be seeing the livido reticularis, the subcutaneous nodules, and the digital ischemia. Here you can see the fingers, all the necrosed due to the secondary to ischemia, and the gangrene. Whereas the small vessel vasculitis, as we discussed, palpable purpura, peripheral neuropathy, glomerulonephritis, and pulmonary infiltrate. So these are important: palpable purpura and peripheral neuropathy. So the clues to classify the types of vasculitis, depending upon the clinical features. If there is an pulse deficit, variable BP, the BP would be more in the lower limbs and very less in the upper limbs. So clubbing, length in the limbs, bruit or jaw claudication and stroke. It's mostly due to the large vessel vasculitis, and this variable BP is mostly seen in Takayasu arteritis and the pulse deficit. Whereas in the medium vessel vasculitis, that is involving radial, femoral, and splenic artery, you will be seeing nodules, livido reticularis, digital ischemia, ischemic renal failure, testicular pain, and tenderness. And in the small vessel vasculitis, there is palpable purpura, ulcers, pulmonary hemorrhage and infiltrates, and peripheral neuropathy. So this is nothing but these slides which we have discussed. So jaw claudication, temporal artery thickening, and scalp necrosis, headache and stroke. This is important. Variable clubbing and limb size. seen in large vessel vasculitis. And the important thing is variable BP and pulse deficits. And some of the conditions which leading to the vasculitis, we discussed this previously also. Infectious causes could be bacterial endocarditis, pulmonary histoplasmosis, Lyme's disease or Whipple's disease, or neoplasms such as lymphoma. And the drug toxicity is cocaine, important, and the arsenic. And the others are sarcoidosis, atherogenic diseases, and amyloidosis, and so on. But here the important things that we have to remember is the infectious disorders is bacterial endocarditis and antiphospholipid antibody syndromes, and the lymphomas, the cocaine and arsenic toxicity, and the sarcoidosis and amyloidosis. So how do you want to do the differential diagnosis? Look for the secondary causes of the vasculitis when the patient does not appear to fit within any of the primary vasculitis. The embolic disorders such as endocarditis, left atrial myxoma, cholesterol emboli can mimic a small vessel vasculitis. So when the embolic disorders, you could be seeing emboli being formed in endocarditis and left atrial myxoma. This can mimic the same as small vessel vasculitis. So you should be able to differentiate between them. And the infections such as sepsis, fungal infections, mycobacterial infections, and others. And the autoimmune disorders, as we discussed, SLE and amyloidosis, in the absence of vasculitis, can present with vasculitis type symptoms. And the drugs and the malignancies and thrombocytopenia and myelodysplastic syndromes. So the diagnostic criteria, the American College of Rheumatology has given the diagnostic criteria for Arthritis, arthritis, polyarthritis nodosa, Kawasaki disease, Stuxtra syndrome, and hypersensitivity vasculitis. So these 6 vasculitis disorders have been given a defined classification, but whereas the remaining have no set of criteria for diagnosis, but are diagnosed clinically with the help of laboratory testing. So the diagnostic criteria we discuss individually. And diagnostic testings, the basic testing should be included is complete blood count, the comprehensive metabolic panel, that is with creatinine levels and all, and the muscle enzymes, creatinine kinase, aldolase, ESR, C-reactive protein, hepatitis, HIV serologies, urine analysis, and urine toxicology. So these should be done when you are suspecting any vasculitis. It doesn't depend if it's on primary vasculitis or secondary or large vessel or medium vessel. These are the basic laboratory analysis that should be done. And the more specific are ANA, the antinuclear antibodies, the complement levels, and the specific ANCA antibodies, that is C-ANCA and P-ANCA. So depending upon, then we can differentiate which. And imaging, the basics are chest radiography and echocardiogram and angiogram, whereas the diagnostic procedure, sometimes you need to do biopsies, whereas in conditions such as giant cell arthritis. So the treatment, so the most important is the immunosuppression. So it could be done with glucocorticoids, or usually in all systemic vasculitis patients. But whereas the giant cell arthritis and Stuxtra syndrome often undergo remission. So cyclophosphamide is combined with the corticosteroid and rapidly progressive vasculitis, such as ANCA-associated conditions. And whereas in the patients where you see relapses, there you can give mycophenolate mofetil. And the methotrexate, azathioprine, mycophenolate are used for less severe forms of vasculitis and for the maintenance therapy. So if you can see, almost all autoimmune disorders, the 4 main drugs, or the drugs which we use are steroids, the first, the cyclophosphamide, the mycophenolate mofetil, and the methotrexate. So these drugs, if you can remember these 4, you can write it for any autoimmune disorders, starting with the steroids, and depending upon the condition, such as in rheumatoid arthritis and all, we give methotrexate, and the other conditions such as SLE and all, we give mycophenolate mofetil and cyclophosphamide. The rituximab, this is anti-CD20 B cell anti-B cell depleting agent, and is it is almost similar to cyclophosphamide for ANCA-associated vasculitis. So anti-CD20, which acts on B cells, decreasing the B cells, so it decreases the autoimmunity, rituximab. And we'll discuss about this later. So we'll go into Takayasu arteritis. So the large vessel vasculitis, we have Takayasu arteritis and giant cell arteritis. So in the Takayasu arteritis, the Chapel Hill Conference defined Takayasu arteritis as rare granulomatous inflammation of the aorta and its major branches. So this is one of the granulomatous vasculitis. So we have 4 granulomatous vasculitis, and Takayasu arteritis is one of them. It is a rare granulomatous inflammation of the aorta and its major branches. And the Takayasu arteritis may also affect pulmonary and coronary arteries. Though those are small vessel vasculitis, it may involve the pulmonary and coronary arteries also. It is chronic vasculitis characterized primarily by stenotic but also less frequently by aneurysmal lesions of the large arteries. So it's mostly involves the large arteries by involving it may the stenotic effect, but aneurysmal lesions can also be seen. And in some patients, there may be involvement of pulmonary and coronary arteries also. So it's most common in Asians, and it's most characteristically affects women more than the men, and it's approximately 10:1 ratio. And the peak onset is in 3rd decade, and the patients mostly die after the age of the 40. And so the pathophysiology of the Takayasu arteritis is not known, and it's a focal pan-arteritis affecting large vessels and their major branches with subsequent stenosis and aneurysmal formation. And approximately 98% of the patients develop stenosis. Aneurysms are very less common, but may also be seen. And on gross examination, the affected vessels are thick and rigid, and the lumen is skipped fashion, with normal lumen alternating with stenosis or aneurysm. So you can see the vessel here, there is stenosed here vessels and there is normal in between. So there is skipped fashion, and the microscopic examination of acute aortic inflammation reveals that thickening of the adventitia, intimal hyperplasia, granuloma formation, and chronic inflammation is characterized by fibrosis of all 3 vessel layers. As you can see here, pan-arteritis, involvement of all 3 vessel layers, the thickening of the adventitia, intimal hyperplasia, and granuloma formation and giant cells. So the important points are the pan-arteritis and mostly by stenosis, and there is a skipped fashion and involves all 3 layers and intimal hyperplasia and giant cell formation. It's a granulomatous disease. So the clinical features are the phase 1, you will see the pre-pulseless inflammatory of phase characterized by non-specific constitutional symptoms such as fever, malaise, arthralgia, and weight loss. And whereas the phase 2 by vessel inflammation manifesting as pain and tenderness, and most commonly results in keratodynia, that is pain on palpation of the carotid artery. When you try to palpate the carotid artery, the patient complains of the pain and the tenderness, that is keratodynia. And the phase 3 is called burnt out or fibrotic stage, is characterized by arterial stenosis leading to ischemic symptoms. So there are 3 phases, that is pre-pulseless inflammatory phase, where you will be seeing fever and arthralgias and weight loss. The second is pain and tenderness, and the third is stenosis leading to fibrotic or burnt. So the disease presentation is variable. Only the half of the patients have constitutional symptoms, and many patients have both inflammatory and fibrotic manifestations at the same time. So all the patients may not present in the phase 1, they may present in the phase 3 also straight away. The monophasic disease may also occur. This is what they may occur straight away in the phase 3. And the classic presentation of Takayasu arteritis is young women with signs and symptoms of abnormal cerebral or upper extremity blood flow. This is important. most commonly in young women with signs and symptoms of abnormal cerebral or upper extremity blood flow. And the diagnosis prior to the stenotic phase of the disease is unlikely given the non-specific constitutional symptoms. So once the stenosis is established, then only we can give the perfect diagnosis, because these are present in other conditions also, fever, malaise, so it's non-constitutional, non-specific. Sorry. So once the arterial stenosis is established, then only we can go for the definitive diagnosis of the. So the other clinical features include fever, malaise, night sweats, anorexia and weight loss. And on the physical examination, we will be seeing pulselessness and unequal brachial blood pressures, subclavian carotid bruits and carotidemia. So when you check the blood pressure in both the arms, there will be difference in both the arms more than 20, and they include pulselessness, and subclavian carotid bruits and carotidemia will be present. And these manifestations are attributed to ascending aorta, aortic arch, with the involvement with resultant stenosis of their major branches and distal organ hypoperfusion. So when the aorta and the aortic arch is involved, it results in the stenosis of major branches that come out, and leads to the organ hypoperfusion. And the hypertension may be noted as well as is often due to aortic or renal artery stenosis. So patients will present with hypertension, but that is due to secondary to aortic and renal artery stenosis. The important point is there is pulselessness and unequal brachial blood pressures. These 2 points are very important. The pulselessness and unequal brachial blood pressure, and the organ hypoperfusion due to the stenosis of the branches, and hypertension due to the aortic and renal artery stenosis. So the diagnostic criteria. So as we discussed, only 6 vasculitis syndromes have the diagnostic criteria, and the Takayasa is one of them. And the 6 criteria, at least 3 of them should be present. So what are the 6 which has in the criteria included? The age should be less than 40. The claudication of the extremities, especially the upper extremities, decreased pulses in the one or both brachial arteries, systolic blood pressure difference of 10 mm between the arms, and bruit over one or both subclavian arteries or abdominal aorta, and the arteriogram showing narrowing or occlusion, usually focal or segmental, of the aorta and its primary branches, large arteries in the proximal upper or lower extremities, not due to atherosclerosis or fibromuscular dysplasia. So age of less than 40 and the claudication of the extremities. So mostly upper extremities are involved. So the claudication in the upper extremities with an blood pressure of difference of more than 10 mm, and there no pulse in the brachial arteries, and involvement of the bruit and the presence of bruit in the subclavian and abdominal aorta, and narrowing or occlusion of the arteries, which is not due to the arteriosclerosis or fibromuscular dysplasia. So you should differentiate whether the narrowing of the arteries is due to the arteriosclerosis or fibromuscular dysplasia, which is usually focal or segmental of the aorta. So aorta is the most important, and it should not be due to arteriosclerosis and the fibromuscular dysplasia, and involving the upper and lower extremities, that is proximal arteries, the large arteries in the upper and lower extremities. So if these 3 of the 6 criteria is met, then we can categorize the patient into Takayasu arthritis with the other findings such as raised ESR, mild anemia and IgG levels raised, and strong suspicion in young women with absent peripheral pulses, discrepancies in BP recordings and arterial bruit, and the diagnostic criteria arteriography. And in imaging, here you can see intra-arterial angiography has been the gold standard for detecting diseased vessels. Intra-arterial angiography and the MR and CT angiography are now available. You can provide details about the vessel wall itself. And the ultrasound can be used to evaluate carotid and abdominal arterial disease, whereas the PET scanning can detect the glucose uptake in the inflamed conditions. So whenever you are doing the PET scan, there will be dye being induced, fluorodeoxy, and the dye is taken up in the parts where there is more glucose production. So whenever in the conditions where you are suspecting of carcinoma and all, or when there is an inflammation or any autoimmune disorder, not in all autoimmune disorders, but when they are suspecting inflammation in some area, or there is maybe due to the secondary, due to the any carcinomas and all, whenever you give this dye, it will be more taken up by the area where there is more glucose production, where there is where there is more cell production. That is how this PET scan works. And the intra-arterial angiography has been the gold standard for detecting disease vessels. Important point here, takeaway point. Intra-arterial angiography has been the gold standard for detecting the diseased vessels. Whereas MR and CT angiography can also be done. And the treatment. It depends upon the long-term outcomes of the patient that has arthritis. The treatment includes the steroids with the aggressive surgical management. So acute signs and symptoms, you can give steroids, whereas there is arterioplastic, there is very high stenosis, then you have to go for the surgical management. So how do you want to give? The oral corticosteroids should be started at a dose of 1 mg per kg per day, or a maximum of 60 mg of prednisolone per day. So any patient when you are diagnosed in arthritis, psoriasis arthritis, we start with corticosteroids. They are oral corticosteroids, which should be started 1 mg per kg per day, or a maximum of 60 mg of prednisolone per day. This dose may be continued for 1 to 3 months until the improvement. And if the disease continues to respond, steroids may be tapered, or an alternate drug should be added, like methotrexate, which is 0.3 milligram per kg per week, is the first choice, with the initial maximum dose of 15 mg per week, and that can be tapered up to titrated up to 25 milligrams per week. So whenever you are giving steroids and you see there is no effect of the steroids, any of the cytotoxic agent is started. So which is the best one to start in psoriasis arthritis is methotrexate, which can be given at initial maximum of 15 mg per week, or and titrated up to 25 mg per week. That is 0.3 milligram per kg per week is the first choice. And half of the patients required cytotoxic agent due to the relapse or insufficient initial response to the steroids. If the steroids cannot be tapered, that is, you cannot decrease the steroids within the 6 months, or cannot be discontinued within the 12 months, then also you will add the cytotoxic agent initiation, and the agent is considered a failure and stop. So you started steroids, you started cytotoxic agent. So if the steroids cannot be tapered to an alternate day regimen, we are giving daily, and if it cannot be tapered to alternate day regimen within 6 months, or cannot be discontinued within 12 months of initiating cytotoxic agent, the agent is considered to be a failure and is stopped. So it's important whether the agent is working or not should be followed, and if it's there is no difference in the dose of the steroids, then the agent is stopped and another agent should be added. So what are the surgeries that you can be doing in these conditions? It is bypass surgery and angioplasty used to treat the permanent arterial damage that results. So here it is a pan-arthritis condition, so involving all the layers of the arthritis, but there is a skipped version. So here you can be in the indications where you want to go for surgical management. The aggressive management is hypertension associated with renal artery stenosis, extremity ischemia that limits the activities of daily living, severe stenosis of at least 3 cerebral vessels, symptoms of cerebral ischemia, moderate aortic regurgitation, cardiac ischemia, and expanding aneurysm. So in simple terms, you can say when there is involvement of the kidneys, that is due to secondary to renal artery, or involvement of the brain due to involvement of the cerebral vessels, but at least 3 cerebral vessels and more than 70% of the stenosis, and involvement of the heart, that is cardiac ischemia due to the coronary artery stenosis. So the major organs, the brain, the kidney, and the heart. So when these 3 are involved, and the corresponding vessels which supply them are stenosed, then you should go for the surgical management. Or a patient is presenting with cerebral ischemia or moderate aortic regurgitation, then also you can go for it. Or the last important one is an expanding aneurysm, that is the risk of rupture. So when an aneurysm rupture occurs, then patients end up in sudden death. So when there is an expanding aneurysm, that is the risk of aneurysm, also involves a surgical intervention. Angioplasty and endovascular stenting may also be used for stenosis. Most commonly, it is used for renal artery stenosis. Although with angioplasty and there is increasing experience with angioplasty and stenting of subclavian, coronary, and aortic stenosis, it is most important for renal artery stenosis because this leads to hypertension, and secondary to hypertension, then we will be seeing hemorrhage and all. So it's very important that renal artery stenosis is relieved first, because once the patient ends up in the renal failure, it's very hard to bring him back. So, and sudden death can be seen. And the time taken for subclavian and coronary arteries to be stenosed is more, whereas compared to renal artery stenosis. So it's very important that angioplasty and endovascular stenting is most commonly done for renal artery stenosis. So the involvement, here you can see the indications are involvement of the major organs such as kidney, the brain, and the heart. Then you can go for the surgical treatment. So steroids, methotrexate, and the surgical treatment. So the next is giant cell arteritis or the temporal arteritis. Definition is the giant cell arteritis is defined as granulomatous arteritis of the aorta and its major branches, particularly the extracranial branches of the carotid artery. So, important here, the extracranial branches of the carotid artery, and it's a granulomatous disease. This is the second one. You have two forms here in this giant cell arteritis. When giant cell arteritis occurs when the extracranial branches of the carotid artery are involved. This manifests as headache, jaw claudication, and visual changes. And the large vessel giant cell arteritis occurs when the carotid, the subclavian, the axillary, and the other large vessels of the branch of the aorta are affected. So the aortic arch syndrome, especially the arm claudication and the aortitis can be seen. The two types where cranial arteries occurs when extracranial branches of the carotid are involved, so leading to jaw claudication, visual changes, and headache. Whereas the large vessel giant cell arteritis occurs when carotid and subclavian, axillary, and other large vessels are involved. So this is most commonly seen in the 6th to 7th decade. Mostly it's more in the patients of more than 50 years, and it's most common in females. So both giant cell arteritis and Takayama arteritis is most common in females. And the etiology for this is also not known, but the genetic factors, that is presence of HLA-DR4, which is significantly associated with giant cell arteritis, and the polymorphism, the second one is HLA-DRB1, and the infections such as herpes virus and parvovirus. So the important points here are the mean age, that is after the 50 years, most commonly in 6th to 7th decade, and involvement of the HLA-DR4. So the pathogenesis, cell-mediated process appears to drive the giant cell arteritis pathology. There is the production of macrophages play multiple roles, the secretion of interleukins, transforming growth factor beta and promoting oxidative damage, producing nitric oxide. And this leads to inflammation and edema. Or the interleukin 6 strongly correlate with disease activity, mRNA levels of the interferon gamma. While the presence of giant cells led to the naming of the disease, they are typically absent. You can see, while the presence of giant cells led to the name of the disease, they are not present in every condition. Sorry. Now, the infiltrates may be granulomatous, being characterized by presence of histiocytes and multinucleated giant cells. So, if the pathogenesis cell-mediated process appears to drive giant cell arteritis pathology. When present, they are found to close fragmented internal elastic lamina. This correlates to elevated platelet-derived growth factor levels and increased risk of ischemic complications. So the symptoms, when it's involved cranial vessels, headache, jaw claudication, that is pain on chewing. Whenever the patient tries to chew something, he will be seeing the pain. and he will be unable to move the jaw, that is jaw claudication. The scalp tenderness, the loss of vision, and the abnormalities of the temporal arteritis such as pain, nodules, and absence of pulse. Due to the involvement of great vessels, that is aorta and branches of aorta, claudication of the extremities, especially the arm, and due to the systemic inflammation, fever, night sweats, and the polymyalgia rheumatica, mainly proximal myalgia and the stiffness of neck and shoulder and pelvic girdles. So you can see mainly proximal myalgia, stiffness of the neck and shoulder and pelvic girdles. So the important points here are jaw claudication, scalp tenderness, and loss of vision. So this is loss of vision, which is very important, and the jaw claudication, this can be remembered, and the claudication of the extremities, fever, night sweats, and polymyalgia rheumatica is something we see, that is mainly proximal myalgia and the stiffness of the neck and the shoulder and the pelvic girdles. So as we seen this previously, the jaw claudication, the scalp involvement, and the inflammation of the temporal arteries here, and the pale and swollen optic disc with edema, with adjacent retina impacted. So there will be loss of vision. This is it. The involvement of the, here you can see the stenosed vessels, and here you can see the involvement, the inflammation of the aorta. So how do you want to diagnose? There is no two diagnostic criteria to exist for giant cell arteritis. Though can be influenced by decision to proceed with subsequent temporal artery biopsy. So it is important. Temporal artery biopsy, the arterial biopsy. So the following clinical findings were effective in distinguishing giant cell arteritis from other forms. That is, age of more than 50 years, the time of the disease onset, localized headache of new onset, tenderness or decreased pulse of temporal artery, or ESR placed for more than 50 mm, or the biopsy revealing necrotizing arteritis with predominance of mononuclear cells or granulomatous process. So here you can remember the necrotizing arteritis on biopsy with granulomatous disease, and this all we discussed previously, and another one is increased ESR. So age, headache, the tenderness, and the decreased pulse we have discussed. The new are ESR of more than 50, and the arterial biopsy, which is revealing necrotizing arteritis with a granulomatous process. But the important point here is the patient has existing diagnosis of the vasculitis. The presence of 3 of the 5 criteria is associated with 94% sensitivity and 91% specificity. So the 3 would be enough. He has existing or previously diagnosed vasculitis. The lab investigations similar to other ones, the complete blood picture, the ESR, CRP levels, and IL-6 levels, and the imaging. MRA is the choice of the diagnosis, the angiography, magnetic resonance angiography, and the diagnostic procedures are temporal artery biopsy. So it's very important you do biopsy in here. This is the gold standard in establishing the diagnosis of giant cell arteritis, and should be done in all patients suspected of giant cell arteritis. And the temporal artery biopsy is 94% specific. So the treatment is almost all similar. You start with glucocorticoids, which is prednisolone at 40 to 60 mg per oral daily once you have suspected the diagnosis. So here the important point is to start it immediately once a patient has been suspected. Even before you have diagnosed, once you suspect, upon depending upon the clinical features, there you can start the prednisolone at 40 to 60 mg per oral daily. And the intravenous use of glucocorticoids, that is 15 mg per kg of methylprednisolone for 3 doses in case of suspecting. So here you can see it could be for at least 2 to 4 weeks. The glucocorticoid should be maintained starting dose, this is 15 mg per kg, for at least 2 to 4 weeks, and the disease activity resolves whichever comes later. And it should be tapered over following next 9 to 18 months. And prednisolone tapering is to reach 20 mg per day at 2 months of therapy. So you started 40 to 60 mg, it should come to 20 mg per day after 2 months of therapy. And the tapering schedule will slow down after this. Usually 10 mg per day is reached or 1 mg per month until 12 months. So it's important you start at 40 to 60 mg and maintained at least 2 to 4 weeks or whenever the disease activity resolves, whichever comes later. So if the disease activity is coming later, even after if it is taking 8 or 10 weeks, then you have to wait there. Or if it's coming within 2 to 4 weeks, then you can stop it here. Or it should be tapered over 9 to 18 months. So it should not be stopped immediately. It should be slowly tapered and then it should be stopped. So how do you want to taper? It should be tapered to a level of 20 mg per day after 2 months of therapy. And usually the tapering schedule will slow down after this, and it's 10 mg per day or 1 mg per month until the 12 months. And other drugs are low-dose aspirin to prevent TIA and stroke, methotrexate, infliximab, and tocilizumab. I think I will stop here today. The medium vessel and small vessel vasculitis will discuss in the next class. So the takeaway point here from the temporal arteritis is most commonly seen in 6th to 7th decade and HLA-DR4 involvement, and it's a cell-mediated response. And there is, though we know there is jaw claudication, loss of vision is the most important one here. And the biopsy, temporal artery biopsy, is the gold standard in establishing the diagnosis of giant cell arteritis. So I think we will stop it here, and thank you.